Yesterday marked the end of the two-day 35th Assembly of the African Union that was held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The gathering addressed urgent matters pertaining to the continent, including the recent sequence of 6 coups or attempted coups over the past 18 months. Now, in 1999, African governments reviewed the Organization of African Unity, which has been in existence since 1963. And then, of course, the AU was formed. As it marks its 20th anniversary this year, the question is whether the new version of the OAU has developed considerable agency since its official launch in South Africa in 2002. Africa and international relations consultant Dr. Charles Sinkala joins us this morning to share his views on whether the AU does have capacity to shape the agenda, make decisions, develop policy, and give strategic leadership for the African continent. Dr. Sinkala, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure having you.
The pleasure is always mine. Good morning to your listeners and the viewers. Thank you.
So this was the first time that heads of state and leaders actually met in person in Addis Ababa since obviously the advent of COVID. So this be in itself quite a big move. I mean, how would you summarize it? What were your views of what came out of it?
Yes, Leon, thank you very much for such an opportunity. For us to understand the AU, one, we have to look at the mission. Secondly, we must look at the success and the failures over the past years, and as well as the challenges it has been faced with. And lastly, the fourth one, we must look at the reforms that are required to overcome the failures and the challenges that the Organization of African Union, as it was established, has been facing with. The mission was very simple. After the heads of state and government realized that for democracy to flourish, they need technocracy practice as well to provide technical expertise to the member states. The successes and failures has been that it has successfully succeeded, in establishing a good institutional framework in terms of policy formulation. In fact, one of the guys when I was flying to Addis Ababa indicated that AU has the highest qualified civil servants in the world because they come up with very good policies. In terms of, as well as other successes would be, having long-term goals for Africa, Agenda 2063, and as well as the Inter-Africa Free Trade Agreement, which was formulated for Africa to implement and yet to be ratified by Nigeria and a few more other countries, as well as it has successfully succeeded in failing to stop the importations of toothpicks. It has successfully succeeded in failing to have a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council, which shall provide proper checks and balances in terms of peace and security on the continent, as well as successfully succeeded to fail in terms of combating the coup d'etats, when we had the first coup d'etat in 1961 when Patrice Emery Lumumba was killed by the CIA agent. The challenge is, yes, Leon, we can talk about the structural capacity of the AU, where we have the Assembly of Heads and States, who only meets once in a year, and these are the heads of state and government who are supposed to be watched by a watchdog, by providing an independent oversight to check on their accountability. The Pan-African Parliament, as you have seen last year, it's a complete disaster where adult supervision is needed as those representatives of constituencies on the continent and the member states, have no direction. That Pan-African Parliament should be an institution that's supposed to be providing checks and balances to the heads of state and government. Reforms that we need for the AU to overcome the failures and the challenges, it is that we need the AU to be independent, so that, you can't have a criminal and a judge at the same time. An independent body with technocracy expertise to overcome the situations on the continent.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, quite a lot discussed and a lot of issues that affecting the continent. But let's just dig into a couple of them. And one of the points up for discussion is, of course, pushing for a better representation of Africa in the United Nations Security Council. So when we look at that and we talk about peace and security, I mean, already when you mentioned all of these coups that have been taking place on the continent, it is a great worry. I mean, a sudden rise in coups in many, many countries. What contribution does Africa bring when we can't get peace and security right here on the continent for its people?
Look, it is very important that, one Africa, in itself, through the AU, canvass for all the member states, to make sure that they get one voice. That is one of the other powers that the AU should have had, to influence all the member states to have one agenda and move forward. And in that way, then they will control or dictate any debate or discussion regarding any forum from the world and how the world will view us in terms of trade, peace and security. The peace and security seat, on the United Nations is very significant in the sense that, most of the civil wars, the resurgences of political instabilities and any other vices on the continent emanates from the outside. So if they will have the permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council, that will provide a complete overview to discuss as well to those people or countries or agents that are involved into private and military security contractors, such as France, such as Russia and the United States of America.
So, I mean, going back to, let's take a trip back to the formation of the OAU. And this decision, of course, was taken in 1999 to replace the AU, a predecessor of the OAU, to create a new continental organization. And this is, of course, to build on the work that's been done. What had been the OAU's achievements to actually build on?
Look, actually, the renaming of Organization of African Union in, 1991 and ratified in 2002 was actually the downfall because they chose an avenue of doing administration work, policy formulation, and as well as there's a policy which is pending that was supposed to be implemented by the 55 member states, that a technocracy oversight function should be, outsourced from the AU. But the challenges is from member states. They are in the view that they will lose their sovereign power. They do not want to be watched from another organization. They believe that they are the heads of state and government of their individual member states, and they should dictate or have the final say in terms of their governance. But if you see the challenges and the problems that the continent has been facing, all the problems are universal problems where, not even President General Buhari will have a say, in terms of humanitarian crimes against humanity, that those crimes against humanity are crimes for the whole continent and the world, which has been identified by the United Nations Security Council and the other treaties that has been signed. So these are the issues that AU now remains as like what one has explained it, that it's just like an old-aged home playing bingo, not worrying about what is happening in the rest of the continent. They just go there to the summit, take photos, and they make speeches. More than 10,000 speeches has been addressed on those conferences, and none of them have seen the light of any implementation on the continent. We've had more than 6 coup d'etats in the last 18 months, with a lot of destabilization. Most of these coup d'etats were successful, and the West Africa now believes that another way of getting into government or at the whim of the president or prime minister is through the coup d'etat, unlike on the southern part of Africa, where we still practice democracy and respect the rule of law and elections.
Yeah. Dr. Sinkala, I mean, you raise such important issues, and that at the heart of all of it. I mean, the amount of speeches that you have just, quoted that have been told, the amount of promises that have been made and yet never being achieved. And this is a very big worry because, I mean, even with when we saw some of these coups taking place, the response time from the AU has been, many have criticized this and saying, but what are they there for? So let me ask you this. What would you say are the challenges that they face? I mean, what is it? Is it implementation deficits that we are seeing all the time? Are they rooted in the fact that it's not financially independent and it depends too much on external donors? Or can we just put it down to absolute leadership challenges?
Yes, Leanne, many challenges are faced by the AU. One is the structural dynamics and the diabolic machination of how the system of AU now is operating, with the two centers of powers, one of the highest bodies, assemblies of heads of state and government, who only meets once a year. For instance, the challenge with Palestine and Israel, was suspended in the AU at the weekend. That it will only be discussed in 2023. This is 2022. As well as the Pan-African Parliament, which I mentioned earlier, that is dysfunctional. Which is supposed to be the parliament of the people, representatives from all the member states. To call heads of state. I want to see the head of state being summoned in Pan-African Parliament, such as the President Mnangagwa, and ask him pertinent questions. Why do you have the Zimbabweans over crossing the borders and they fleeing your country? What is happening in your country? How can we assist you in terms of providing peace and security and economic stability? I want to see a president or prime minister of Ethiopia and ask him about the same questions about Ethiopia and Tigray. That's how it's supposed to be, like the way the system of the parliament in South Africa, where the deputy president and the president is answerable to the constituencies. But in an absence of that system being implemented and become a ceremonial, it becomes a laughing stock. That the AU challenges in terms of implementing becomes difficult. The response to condemn what is happening on the continent is, for instance, in Burkina Faso, coup d'etat, they come after 1 week after the regional bloc has taken up the step. They are not in the lead in terms of trade and investment. Yeah. We have so much of raw materials being exported outside Africa, which damages the value chain in terms of employment equity within the continent. As the raw materials are exported elsewhere, we're supposed to be produced, refined, and finished products produced within the continent. They have failed to do that. Yeah. They have failed as well to ban certain things that have to be protected from the African continent member states. Unlike the EU is quite clear, of the agenda and its purpose. That's why we have seen over the years the EU has developed, and they've protected the politics and economic trade in those regions. No one can just come from Africa and go and set up a company in the EU countries. It is difficult. Now here we call them investors coming to devour our resources on the continent. It becomes the biggest challenge. Yeah. And one is to legitimize the coup d'etats that we have condemned many times and again. They all also go to meet or debate or negotiate with the winners or the perpetrators of the coup d'etats. It is unceremonial and unprecedented in the history of Africa having such issues like that. There's nowhere we have heard in the news that there was a coup d'etat in the UK, there was a coup d'etat in Germany, there was a coup d'etat in the United States of America. But in Africa, it has been fashioned. And an organization such as AU that we thought as Africans that will give us technocratic expertise, unlike the political expertise of democracy, has been failing us. And I think this is the time now Africa and the African must be looking at what are the options and alternatives in terms of either having another organization that will do exactly what it's supposed to do, only one job.
Indeed. I mean, Dr. Sinkala, you bring up so many important issues. I wish I could carry on, but unfortunately time is not on our side. And I mean, you talk about this whole Israeli issue, and this was one of the issues that was meant to come up right in the beginning. And I mean, as you say, to push it through to 2023, where Israel have now got observer status in the EU. I mean, it's just something that, you know, one would never believe. And also a lot of people saying that this is, it's an old man's club. And it really is. It's impossible to get into, and to bring young, fresh blood and ideas onto the continent is so difficult because they just won't allow these individuals into it. But we'll have to bring you back. We'll have to talk more about this. Dr. Sinkala, thank you for joining us.